The King Street station was a cavern of echoes and cold Pacific air. I was seconds away from boarding the 6:15 p.m. Sounder train, a ticket my wife, Elaine, had insisted on buying for my much-needed weekend hiking trip in the Cascades. My foot was hovering over the gap when a hand clamped onto my shoulder with the force of a vice. I spun around, expecting a transit cop, but I was met by a woman with tired eyes and a damp trench coat. Vance? Step back from the yellow line, she said, her voice a low, urgent rasp. If you get on that train, you aren't coming back. The woman introduced herself as Sarah Miller, but the name didn't matter as much as the folder she was clutching against her chest like a shield. I looked at the train, the very one Elaine had kissed me goodbye for only 40 minutes ago, and then back at this stranger. My wife bought the tickets, I stammered, my engineering mind trying to find a logical path through the confusion. Sarah didn't blink. I know she did, Arthur. She also bought the insurance policy that pays out triple for accidental transit fatalities. She's currently at the precinct filing a missing persons report. The blood in my veins felt like it had turned to slush. Elaine had been so affectionate that morning, packing my favorite trail mix and double-checking my departure time. To hear that she was already reporting me missing before I had even left the city limits felt like a glitch in reality. Sarah pulled a tablet from her bag and showed me a digital timestamp from the Seattle police portal. There it was, a report filed at 5:45 p.m. by Elaine Vance, stating her husband had failed to return from work and was unusually despondent. Sarah led me toward a quiet corner of the station, away from the boarding crowds. She explained that she was a private investigator specializing in high-value insurance anomalies. She had been tracking a specific pattern of tragedies involving the same insurance broker, and my name had just popped up on a high-priority alert. She didn't just want you gone, Arthur, Sarah whispered, the station's fluorescent lights reflecting in her cold gaze. She wanted you to disappear into the machinery of a pre-written story. You were supposed to be a tragic headline by midnight. I looked at my phone, seeing 3 missed calls from Elaine, followed by a text that read, "I have a bad feeling, please call me." It was a masterpiece of digital breadcrumbs, designed to show a worried wife reaching out to a man she already knew was a ghost. My marriage of 7 years, the house in Queen Anne, the plans for a family had all dissolved into a calculated sequence of fraud. I wasn't a husband to her. I was a financial maturity date. The train pulled out of the station, and I watched it go. Knowing I was already dead in the eyes of the law, I realized then that the woman I loved was a predator, who had been sharpening her teeth on my life for years. I wasn't going home to a worried wife. I was going into a war where the first casualty was my own heart. The Pacific rain continued to lash against the station windows, blurring the world outside just like the lies had blurred my life. I had to decide right then if I was going to be a victim or a ghost who fought back. Where are you listening to this story from? Let me know your location in the comments. Sarah led me to a windowless office 3 blocks from the station, a space that smelled of ozone and stale coffee. She laid out a series of surveillance photos that made the room feel even smaller. "You aren't the first, Arthur," she said, sliding a photo of 2 men across the desk. "These are the ghosts who came before you." Both men had died in accidental falls within 18 months of marrying. Both had massive policies, and both had utilized the same boutique insurance broker, a man named Trevor Walsh. Trevor Walsh was the architect of the invisible. He didn't just sell insurance, he sold exit strategies for wives who wanted to be wealthy widows. Sarah showed me the link. Elaine had met Trevor 3 years ago, long before we even moved to Queen Anne. They had been seen together at high-end galas, always maintaining a professional distance, but the digital paper trail told a different story. Every policy Elaine took out on me had been funneled through Trevor's firm, bypassing the standard secondary reviews that usually catch triple indemnity red flags. The most damning piece of evidence was a series of encrypted messages Sarah had intercepted. They discussed my disappearance with the clinical detachment of a construction project. They had a specific timeline, a designated search area, and a list of witnesses who would testify to my recent bouts of instability. Elaine wasn't just my wife. She was an operative in a long con, and I was the final payout she needed to clear her own mounting debts. Trevor provides the legal cover, and Elaine provides the body, Sarah explained. She showed me a life insurance policy I had never seen, totaling for $1 million. The signature at the bottom was a perfect replica of mine, likely forged using the digital tablet I used for work. Every time I had signed a grocery receipt or a birthday card, I had been giving her the tools to draft my death warrant. The betrayal was so deep it felt structural, a rot that had infected every floor of the life we had built together. I looked at the photos of the previous victims and saw the same expression. I probably had the look of a man who realized his happily ever after was actually a death sentence. Trevor and Elaine were a team, a well-oiled machine that turned love into liquid assets. If I went to the police now, they would call it a domestic dispute. If I wanted to stop them, I had to stop being Arthur Vance and start being the one thing they weren't prepared for. A variable they couldn't control. I met Detective Holt in a dimly lit diner in South Seattle, a place where the steam from the grill obscured the faces of the patrons. Sarah had made the introduction, but Holt's expression remained skeptical until he saw the digital timestamps of Elaine's missing persons report. He tapped his pen against the table, his eyes narrowing as he reviewed the $4 million policy. Right now, Arthur, this is just a pile of suspicious coincidences, he admitted. To put them away, we need that. We need them to move on the money. Holt leaned in, his voice barely audible over the clatter of silverware. You need to disappear. For exactly 82 hours, Arthur Vance ceases to exist. No phone, no credit cards, no contact with anyone but us. The plan was a psychological trap designed to trigger Elaine's greed. By vanishing completely, I would force her to escalate her narrative. She would have to contact Trevor to initiate the claim process, and that communication was the link the police needed to wiretap. The next 3 days were a descent into a private purgatory. I stayed in a safe-house, a cramped studio apartment with peeling wallpaper and a view of an alleyway. I watched the local news on a small, flickering television. By the 48th hour, Elaine was on screen, standing on our front porch with a handkerchief pressed to her eyes. She looked devastated, begging the public for any information about her vulnerable husband. It was a performance that would have won an Oscar if it weren't so inherently evil. While she was crying for the cameras, Detective Holt's team was listening to her burner phone. On the third night, the trap snapped shut. A recording captured Elaine calling Trevor Walsh. Her voice wasn't trembling with grief. It was sharp with impatience. He's been gone long enough for the presumed dead clause to kick in for the initial payout, she hissed. Start the paperwork on the Amtrak policy first. I want the liquidity by Monday. Trevor's response was a cold, professional confirmation of the wire transfer details. The evidence was finally shifting from circumstantial to criminal. They weren't just mourning a disappearance. They were managing an investment. Every hour I spent in that dark room, my grief for our marriage was replaced by a cold, calculating resolve. I had spent years as an engineer building structures to last, but now I was helping the police dismantle the most complex and treacherous structure I had ever encountered. The 82 hours were almost up, and the ghost of Arthur Vance was ready to come home for the final audit. The 82 hours expired at midnight, and the transition from ghost back to man was a cold, clinical process. Detective Holt met me at a staging area near the King Street station, the very place where my life had nearly ended for days prior. The missing person search had reached a fever pitch, with local volunteers scouring the rainy hillsides while Elaine sat at home, likely counting the millions in her head. Holt handed me a bulletproof vest. The heavy Kevlar, a physical reminder that my wife didn't just want me gone, she wanted me erased. We arrived at my house in Queen Anne under the shroud of a pre-dawn fog. The lights were on in the living room, and through the window, I could see Elaine and Trevor Walsh. They weren't mourning. They were sitting at my dining table with a bottle of expensive scotch and a spread of legal documents. They were laughing a sound that cut through me more deeply than any knife could. I watched as Trevor slid a final set of forms toward her. The paperwork that would officially trigger the $4.2 million payout. "Sign here, Elaine," Trevor said, his voice audible through the parabolic mic Holt was holding. "Once the police find the discarded jacket near the tracks tomorrow, the accidental death claim becomes ironclad." Elaine took the pen without a moment's hesitation, her face a mask of cold, predatory efficiency. She didn't look like the woman I had shared a bed with for 7 years. She looked like a stranger who had been wearing my wife's skin. As her signature hit the paper, Holt gave the signal to move. The front door didn't just open. It vanished as the tactical team breached the frame. The explosion of noise and light shattered the glass scum of their celebration. I walked in behind the officers, stepping into the light of the chandelier I had installed myself. The look on Elaine's face wasn't one of relief that I was alive. It was a jagged, ugly expression of pure fury. She realized in an instant that the ghost had been the one haunting her all along. Trevor tried to bolt for the back door, but he was tackled into the bookshelves. The very books we had collected on our honeymoon. Elaine remained frozen, her hands still clutching the pen. As the handcuffs clicked into place around her wrist, she didn't cry. She didn't apologize. She simply stared at me with a terrifying, hollow hatred that confirmed every suspicion I'd fought to ignore. The marriage wasn't just over. It was being hauled away in the back of a squad car. If a betrayal like this has ever touched your life, like this video and tell us your story in the comments below. The trial was a clinical dissection of a marriage that had never truly existed. As I sat in the Seattle courtroom, I watched the prosecution play the recordings of Elaine and Trevor discussing my life like a commodity. The triple indemnity clause I had once seen as a safety net was revealed as the price tag on my head. Trevor Walsh's defense crumbled when Sarah Miller presented the data from the 2 previous widows he had represented. The pattern was so identical it looked like a franchise of death. Elaine sat at the defense table, her posture rigid and her expression a mask of icy indifference. She didn't look at me once, even when I took the stand to testify about the hiking trip she had so lovingly planned. The most chilling moment came when the forensic accountant revealed that Elaine had spent the last 3 years slowly draining our joint accounts to fund Trevor's legal consultation fees. She hadn't just been planning my murder. She had been using my own hard-earned salary to pay for the hit. The jury's deliberation was swift, a blunt instrument of justice that mirrored the coldness of the crime. Elaine was sentenced to 21 years in a state penitentiary for attempted first-degree murder and insurance fraud. Trevor Walsh received 17 years for his role as the architect of the scheme. As the judge read the sentence, Elaine finally turned to look at me. There was no remorse in her eyes, only the cold, calculating look of a gambler who had lost a high-stakes hand and was already looking for someone else to blame. The aftermath was a different kind of prison. I returned to the house in Queen Anne, but the walls felt like they were stained with the conversations I had heard on those police tapes. I ended up selling the place, unable to sit in the living room where my wife had toasted to my accidental death. I realized that the woman I had loved for 7 years was a fiction, a character created by a predator to gain access to my trust and my bank account. The grief wasn't for her, but for the life I thought I had. I spent months working with Detective Holt and Sarah Miller to help identify other at-risk spouses in Trevor's client database. It was the only way to make sense of the wreckage. I had survived the train platform, but the engine of my life had been derailed. I wasn't just an engineer anymore. I was a survivor who knew that the most dangerous cracks in a structure are the ones you can't see until the whole thing starts to collapse. The audit was final, the accounts were closed, and the ghost of Arthur Vance was finally free to stop hiding. I now live in a quiet town on the coast, far from the echoes of King Street Station. The sound of a train whistle no longer triggers a panic attack, but it does serve as a somber reminder of the night I almost became a statistic. I've traded my engineering blueprints for a new kind of design, helping state investigators build digital frameworks to flag high-risk insurance anomalies before they turn into headlines. I spend my days staring at data, looking for the Elaines and Trevors of the world who believe that human life is just another line item to be manipulated for profit. The house I live in now is small, filled with furniture that has no history and walls that haven't absorbed the whispers of a conspiracy. I've learned that rebuilding your life after a total structural collapse isn't about clearing the rubble. It's about inspecting the foundation. My trust is no longer given freely. It is earned through transparency and time. I've realized that the marriage I grieved for was a masterpiece of performance art. And while the loss of that dream was painful, the reality of my survival is a much more powerful story. I often think back to Sarah Miller, the stranger in the damp trench coat who pulled me back from the yellow line. She didn't just save my life. She saved my soul from the crushing weight of a lie I never would have uncovered on my own. I've become a mentor for others who have survived intimate fraud, teaching them that being a victim isn't a permanent state of being. We are the architects of our own recovery, and every day we choose to stay in the light is a victory over the predators who thrive in the shadows of triple indemnity. The millions of dollars that were supposed to be the price of my life have been redirected into a fund for victims of financial elder abuse and domestic fraud. It's a small consolation, but it ensures that the greed of two people is now powering the protection of thousands. I am no longer the man who was supposed to disappear. I am a witness to the fact that justice can be as precise as an engineering calculation. The ghost of Arthur Vance has been laid to rest, and in his place stands a man who knows exactly what his life is worth, and its value no insurance policy could ever reach. I sit on my porch as the sun sets over the Pacific. The same water that once felt like it was drowning me in deception. The air is clear, the truth is out, and the ledger of my life is finally in my own hands. I have found solace in the simple fact that I am here to see the stars, a luxury that was almost stolen for the sake of a Scotch toast and a forged signature. My story isn't just about betrayal. It's about the strength found in the aftermath, proving that the most resilient structures are the ones that have been tested by fire and still refuse to fall.